the Wilson tackle on Mark Andrews was interesting to me because I was trying to work out why those tackles happen in football so much and don't in rugby. Rugby league has banned the hip drop tackle as a concept, right? But generally speaking, it's not a tackle that happens all that often in rugby union anyway. Like, I can't remember, forget the hip drop part of it, I can't remember the last time a guy hurt his ankle because his ankle got trapped under the tackler in rugby. Like, it just doesn't come up. Part of that, I think, is definitely because way more often a guy is the tackles are heading towards each other, right? Like, there's a much smaller instance of both the guys running in the same direction, which is where they were here. But I think there's also something to rugby kind of deliberately sliding down the legs rather than hanging on midway and then swinging your body, which is where it gets into trouble. So I kind of agree with you where there's definitely some hip drop tackles in football that are bad and honestly are no different from the horse collar that they outlawed years ago. You know, Dallas's Roy Williams used to be like the horse collar was his thing, right? He'd grab hold of the guy in the back, ride them down, break their ankles, essentially. That was the way that tackle was going. That's why they banned it. The hip drop is effectively exactly the same thing. You're just starting from a lower point. Instead of going up at the neck, you're grabbing them around the waist, but the mechanism is the same. You're jumping on the back of their ankles as you're tackling them. That's where the injuries are occurring. This, I don't think, was even necessarily that. He just kind of, in the course of tackling him, swung around and ended up trapping his ankle under him. So it is an unusual mechanism when it happens like this. The ones that are not like really bad and clearly, against the sort of the spirit of it almost. This is just some weird function of tackling in football that doesn't seem to happen in other contact sports.
Yeah, the interesting thing here too is I think because we've taken launching away from tackling. When again, like we're not like pro injury or pro some of the gnarly hits that happen in football, but I think when I was growing up, you probably wouldn't see this is because guys would just launch forward. And of course, you can try not to lead with the crown of your helmet. You can make sure it's shoulder first and you are launching forward appropriately. But you're going to get, when a guy leaves his feet in that manner, you're still going to get some, not targeting, but, defenseless receiver or unnecessary roughness or various different calls. And so it almost, to me, this obviously wasn't a sack, but I think you've seen a lot of quarterbacks get rolled up on and have ankle issues because now these defensive linemen are saying, all right, if I launch forward, I might get a body weight call against me because I kind of lose control when I launch forward. So I'll grab the guy and just pull him on top of me. But that's when you then twist the lower extremities and things like this happen. So it's just like, it's kind of impossible right now to have a way to tackle where you're not probably going to get penalized. I agree. I'm not even sure I would put this in the hip drop category. I think we've seen worse instances for sure. It's tough. Like, we don't want to see the best players in the league leave, but defenders have to be able to tackle the offensive players. And it's a struggle right now.
Yeah, there's something with the kind of swing, the torquing around of the guy's body that causes this kind of tackle versus just dropping down and and finishing the tackle. Like, there's some times where the differences between football tackling and rugby tackling are because of the yardage. You don't want to, giving up yardage is more important at the contact point in football than it is in rugby, where it doesn't really it doesn't change anything other than giving them a little bit of go forward momentum. This, I don't think, was one of those situations, though. I think a rugby tackle finishes this play in exactly the same yard marker as the hip drop type of tackle or the swing thing did. So I don't think that explains what was happening with this one. I think it's just there's some mechanism whereby that swinging of the body is causing these ankles to get crushed underneath and injuring guys. And I don't know if they're going to go the way. I think definitely they should outlaw the type of hip drop tackle that is effectively just a horse collar but lower down. But even if they did that, I don't know if this tackle qualifies.
I'm really not sure it does. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I get that it looks like the beginning of that type of mechanism of how he approached it. But like you said, there's a swinging element to where you use all of your momentum to kind of swing forward and then pull back. And that's what causes, the lower extremities kind of get trapped underneath you. I don't think it's really what happened here with Logan Wilson. It's just tough. I mean, Andrews is a massive part of this team, obviously kind of going off of that. Obviously, injuries abound for both teams, and losing Joe Burrow potentially at 5-5 for a couple of weeks versus the 8-3 Ravens, might make it harder for them to make the playoffs. But if Mark Andrews is out for the year, it was good to see Odell Beckham Jr. look like himself through most of this game. Obviously, Zay Flowers making plays. Nelson Aguilar keeps kind of popping up and splashing here and there. You did get a Bateman touchdown as well, but not having the number one focal point receiving target for this team of Mark Andrews, I do think Baltimore right now for me is a top 5 team in the NFL, number 2 team in the AFC behind Kansas City. Frankly, I think it's not even really close. I'd say Miami now is probably number 3 in that conversation, but not having Mark Andrews come playoff time is brutal for the Baltimore Ravens to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows what OBJ's injury is going to be like. I mean, it felt a little bit like the Super Bowl, where he was absolutely crushing it. And then as soon as he's back looking 100%, we're going to take away his ACL. Like, this looked like OBJ, old OBJ, like actually making plays, looking like 100%, and then immediately shoulder injury out of the game, on the sideline. So hopefully that's not going to be a long-term thing because, yeah, they might be able to offset the loss of Mark Andrews if Beckham is going to be back at full speed. Zay Flowers' numbers weren't good in this game, but like multiple big plays sort of taken away from him by penalties, negated by penalties. And they haven't, I don't think, massively expanded his route tree or anything, but he showed the kind of plays he can make from a limited route tree, only they don't show up in the stat sheet because they were penalties. And the officiating is another thing that came out of this game. It was horrendous. I mean, they were like, not even the letter of the law. Just if you are even touching a defender or a receiver, we're going to throw pass interference on this. Like, what are we doing with some of these calls?
The biggest thing for me, because I've had conversations about this for the last month now, because it's been horrible in both college and pro. I personally, as like a non-fan of these teams, but also a lot of the games that's happening, I think every fan can find a way to think it's like skewed against them and it's like, oh, the refs are fixing this game. I think there's just been objectively horrible officiating in all directions. And I think this game is probably a prime example. The blocking penalty on Odell Beckham Jr., like you just mentioned, Zay Flowers should have had a 60-yard touchdown catch on that play. Was a phantom call. The pass interference on DJ Turner, which I think was a target to Zay Flowers, also a complete phantom call. I mean, there's just like you said, it's not even, it's ticky-tack or like a Cooper DeJean at Iowa, for example, where we just hate what the rule says. And like, you could probably say, well, technically, like DeJean did wave his arms and whatever. Like, no, it's just they're just making calls and just throwing stuff out there. I think even on a smaller level, there's all that little, there's always kind of the grace period with the play clock and getting the ball off right around 0. Zach Taylor was clearly incensed at one of the later delay of game calls where it was like, yeah, was it between 1 and 0? Like, yeah, it probably was. But like, this is the third time you've called this on us now. So was the enforcement there kind of not consistent? But yeah, it's a problem. Like, I know we probably have the conversation most years, but I feel like this year across the board among all members of the media, whatever, and fans, it's as bad as I can remember it being.
This particular game felt like a crew who was calling the first game they've ever called, and their only like previous experience of the rules is just the book, like the rule book, with zero practical application of how they actually, are impacted or are called in real-time events. Like the sort of the unspoken way that they do that delay of game thing, right? You get the clock to 0, then we take a look back, then we look back, and then it's like, you almost get like a second grace period in the NFL at this point. Whereas they're like, no, the absolute millisecond it hits 0, we're throwing delay of game. And it's like, okay, technically that might be correct, but it's simply not the way it's ever done. So when you decide to do it one game in isolation that doesn't bear any resemblance to anything else, you're just jacking this game. You either need to make that a policy blanket across the board or do it the same way everybody else does. And the same thing with like the pass interference stuff, right? It's like, I have read by the letter of the law that if there's like contact and it in any way, shape, or form potentially impedes the receiver, that's a yellow flag. But it's like, yeah, but not when the receiver is like twisting back and happens to touch the DB whilst contorting back for the football. That's not pass interference the way anybody else in the world recognizes it. You can only think that if you've just like read the rule book and then thrown the thing out without ever like officiating a game before. It was bizarre. And I agree with you. It's not like, it's clearly not a conspiracy. It's not, the script. It's not anybody trying to rig the game. It's Hanlon's razor, right? Like, don't attribute to malice what is just stupidity or incompetence. It's just bad. It's just bad officiating.